You know I had to do it to him. So now that that exciting situation is out of the way, my first original track, What Are You Doing to Me, has debuted. It is now listenable on the internet, on YouTube, on Bandcamp, on Spotify, probably on other places. I don't care. And now we get to talk about all this. This fucking mess that came together to make a track. And the question now becomes, where to start? I guess it would make the most sense to start at the very, very beginning, at the infancy of the track, and I can find precisely where that began, because I started with pretty much just this right here, without any of these things or anything like that. Just this little loop is what I started with. And this track kind of started as two, like, ideas that later merged into one. Because the very first incarnation was, I wonder if I could fit a foghorn bass into liquid drum and bass. And if you're wondering, what the fuck is a foghorn bass? It's this. It's that. And let me also pull the mixer up. And which channel is that? 10? Yeah, let me also pull out a lot of the post-processing, because originally it was just that. That's a foghorn bass. Yeah. And then I sort of opened it up like wop. And then now it's 10,000 miles away in a cave. And that, I think, is kind of a demonstration of how important, like, space is in music, right? Because, like, that could never be atmospheric until you just pull it so far away, turn it into just like this wash of a vibe, right? I hope that made sense. And that was the very first thing I thought when I wanted to make this track. The very second thing is that I was listening to other liquid drum and bass tracks, and I got hit with a favorite of mine from, oh fuck, like over 10 years ago. No, wait, it might have been just 10 years ago. Like somewhere around 2013. And that is Earth Speaker by Archetype, which I then sampled a break out of the end bit of. So we've got this layer of drums that is pretty much lifted out of Earth Speaker. Like if I could just loop this bit, which would, this is the same as this, but without this, you know how it is. And this is on channel 2. And I can pull out these effects, give you the unprocessed of like, and you can really hear where the drum timbre of my own track came from here. Like you've got a really thick kick. It's sort of like on the edge of being a acoustic kick drum. And this big, what I call doofy snare, because it sounds like it's going doof. Like a doof, you know. And that really informed where these drops in this track were going to go. Because Earth Speaker is also very piano heavy. And then that's what I ended up doing in this track, is the main body of the drops is carried by a piano with a low pass filter put over it, but that is for later. And a classic thing in drum and bass as well, and especially I find, and have been told as well, liquid drum and bass, is using drum breaks instead of just programming drums. Like I have an entire drum loop here that I'm using the top end of, mostly to get like the cymbals and like the sort of breathy part of the snare. And I also have this other break to get, again, more cymbal action. And together you get this like kind of big wash of cymbals and high end and such, which really builds on top of the actual program drums of your track, which here is just pretty much, not counting any like cymbals and impacts and such, which are all down here. That's how I keep my projects organized. Is just 2 sounds or 3 sounds. It's a kick and a snare and a clap, and that's literally it. It's literally just like it. This is not a very complicated thing. It's honestly a bit bare bones until you add these other layers to it. And then you start to get that like very distinctive sound of drum and bass, especially the drum part of it. Because a lot of other genres will have that sort of jungle pattern, like kick snare, over and over. But oftentimes having it be part of a break, or having a break as a layer of it, really adds in the sound that otherwise it's hard to get away with not using in the genre. It's sort of like you can have your jungle pattern, but either you need a break layer or a very specific timbre of synthesizers underneath it, or it doesn't quite feel the same as drum bass. Which is not to say you can't do that, because fucking these days you can do anything and get away with it, quite frankly. But that's a jumping off point, generally. So that's sort of like the 2 foundational parts of where this track started and where it ended up going, is trying to combine the vibes that I heard from Earth Speaker like 10 years ago with what initially started as just like, oh, I want to put in a foghorn. That would be funny and interesting. And then it sort of evolved into like, what other bass timbres can I fit in and keep the vibe of liquid drum and bass? Because usually liquid is very melodic and very down to earth and very calming, very ethereal. It's not generally something where you have like this really aggressive timbre like with a foghorn or with like some Reese basses. Reese being, I don't know where the term comes from, but it is a term for a specific kind of bass sound. I don't know if I have an excellent Reese here. I think the best I would have is in the B section of the drops is this loop that I have. I can break out of that loop I set. Is this synth pattern where it's kind of riffing a Fracas and Darwin track, which is interesting because at some point I was showing the work in progress for this, the work in progress track off to some people, and one of them said that it sounds a lot like when Fracas and Darwin try to make drum and bass. Funny that. And I think the track is More Than I Can Take. That's the name of the track. The track itself is not something that is More Than I Can Take. Off their album Diversions, I think. Well, it's very much riffing the bass line found there, but with a bit of a different timbre to it. Like, that's... one of these is a sub bass, and one of these is not, and I don't remember which is which. What is the effects on 13? That looks a lot more like... oh, maybe not. Okay, this would be, I think, the actual synth or upper layer of the Reese. Because look at that high-end action. Look at this. But it's this sort of timbre that I think I've heard a handful of times in chiller tracks, so I knew you could get away with it. But I wanted to try myself, and I ended up with sort of like a... well, hello. How are you today? I am showing off all this fun stuff. So that's sort of the bass line I pulled for the B section, and that contrasts with the bass synth in the A section that's a lot more basic and just pedaling these two chords, which is a B, which is, I think the track ended up being in, I think it was in B minor. I believe that was it. And it's pedaling between B, the 1, and F sharp, which I don't think is technically called F sharp in the key of B minor. I think that, or maybe it is. I think it would be, perhaps. I think if it was in B, no, some weird shit with naming your notes in different scales and harmonic stuff, doesn't matter. F sharp. That's what I call it. It's what my dog calls it, so I just call everything fucking sharps. And that is... yeah, B, and then that's the... you can see, I'm just I don't know these things just by muscle memory, so you can see me fucking counting which chord it is. It is the 1, 2, 3, 4 is the 5. I think it's the major 5 of B minor. Possibly. Anyway, it's literally just a 2 chord vamp that the track is mostly built off of. And this patch in particular was very simple, which is why I contrasted it with this more mobile and more having of character patch for the B section, where it's literally just a very simple. I think it's, yeah, it's literally just an FM modulated sine wave with, yeah, a bit of distortion. Meanwhile, this is 2 layers, one of which is this. Actually, what? So that's the top layer right here. That's sort of a bit more complicated, but still mostly just FM modulation. And then there's a sub layer underneath it, which sort of hits like a 808 type of timbre, like an 808 kick drum, especially with the pitch attack at the start. Then it combines into a much wider sound, and I think I even chain the 2 together. Yeah, the top layer goes into the effect channel for the sub, which then goes into, I think this is a aggregate, every single bass patch goes into this mixer channel sort of deal. And then earlier in the track, I decided to go with another type of bass timbre that I don't know if I believe I might not have even heard this in any drum and bass before. It's definitely not any Liquid. It's probably in some track that I will not have heard, because I don't actually listen to drum and bass that much, all things considered. Oops. But I took this patch, and you can see that I also have a variation on the vamp, where it goes down a half step at the end, that I used in this section and in the B section of the drop. I also modified the vamp to go down, or to step down towards the home chord at the end. But this is more of like a UK garage type patch. A lot more reminiscent of like future garage and 4x4 garage and speed garage. Which, by the way, if you've ever heard like a Scouse House donk or a Russian hard bass donk, exact same fucking patch, exact same technique. Cool fact that I learned. But you get sort of this like, you can even hear that the one landing on the, I think that's the 3 of the bar, is like that sort of donk timbre that you get. And that has, I think that is in Vital is that reverb. Wait, what the fuck? Where the hell is it then? It's not in Vital. It's not in, no, oh no, here it is. I have the wrong one highlighted. It is here. Just some basic fruity reverb. The donk? The donk. You know. The donk. The donk. So that's sort of an exploration of the actually somewhat interesting bass patches I've tried to shove in here. There's also like a very basic just low restrone that's just like a whole whatever, it doesn't matter. There's nothing interesting here happening at all. It is just a low pass sawtooth wave with a little bit of saturation. That is it. There's nothing cool. Doesn't even have any post-processing effects on it. Anyway, the probably main meat and potatoes of the drops is the piano, which this is not gonna, well, I think it initialize this track with the filter at that sort of location, which is not gonna be super great to demonstrate. Oh, I guess not. I guess if I mute this, it doesn't matter. But it's just this like hard piano hit following the chords of the track, which, since these are a lot more full chords, we can actually look at exactly what's playing here, which is looks like a B sus2 and with a like a B7 sus2 in first inversion, I think that is. And then into a what looks to be F sharp minor 7 sus2, or F sharp minor 7 in first inversion, I think. I'm not great with my inversions. That could be third inversion, don't quote me. And I think those chord names also might not be 100% correct. But what are you gonna do? It's my song. I can call these whatever I want. But it's also, hi, hello, Celeste Dragon. Welcome to the stream where we talk about music shit, and I say very big words. Like vamp, the biggest word of all. So yeah, most of the track is just built on this 2-chord vamp. A vamp, by the way, being a progression that is only 2 chords long. I learned that when I tried to use vamp to talk about a progression that was more than 2 chords. And, oops. I was slightly wrong there. But most of the track is built off of that, with the addition of the parts of the bass line that sort of drop around to like walk down to the home chord. I like your funny words, Magic VTuber. Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys. Yeah, I did notice that, like, well, first of all, I just wanted to, for the B section, have that piano, which, by the way, is Keyzone Classic, a honestly really good and technically free piano plugin. I say technically because you have to buy something else from BitSonic to get it legally. And it didn't used to be that way, and that's how I had it before. So don't ask how I got it. It's just a mystery. But honestly, it is... I've heard it said as, like, the best free piano you can get multiple times, and I'm not entirely sure if that's 100% the case, but it's certainly the best I've heard, and the one that I default to, like, all the time, especially the Yamaha Grand preset. I feel like the, like, Keyzone piano one is not quite as good. Like, it's fine, but then compared to, like, that's, like, way softer, and because the Keyzone piano is like really bright, this is way softer, and I feel it sounds a lot more human when you play around with velocity. Not that I do that in this track, because every single chord played the piano is at max velocity. It's weird. It is weird. I don't like the keys on piano. And I haven't really used the other presets here too often. I think I've used the organ, I think I've used the electric piano, that's really it. I mostly just use this for the Yamaha Grand. But what I wanted is to have sort of a closed filter for the B section where everything is a lot more dark and muted, and just hear this like it's all happening like the low and mid end, while everything else sort of plays around it. Especially to focus more on the bass that comes in here. But when I added this little slope here to gradually bring that down, gradually close that filter, I ended up with hearing that's very interesting in terms of soundscape for me. It's like, what if I did that to every chord? And then I ended up with this sound that I think really elevates what's going on here. It adds so much more movement that I feel like I really wanted here. Another thing I also added, in an attempt to sort of get that movement I was looking for, is there's this arpeggio down here that kind of very roughly outlines the chords being played. You can see that there's some stuff that is not, there's some notes that are not in the chord, there's some notes that are not in each other loop of the arp, because it goes up and then up, and like this only happens in this one, and like this only happens in this one, you know. And that sort of adds a bit of variation to it, makes it a lot more loose of an interpretation of the chords being played. That you also get this like stereo delay that really widens the scape and also makes it not like difficult to tell where the actual note is being played, but I think it makes it less clear that it's just one ascending arp and more like it's just the shower of notes in the chord. And that's sort of the vibe I wanted, of having this like not necessarily a melody or an arpeggio or a chord, but just like a wall of harmony to sort of glue it together a little bit. And it ended up being so low in the mix that for the most part during the drops you can't really hear it, but I did bring it out in this breakdown basically on its own to give it a bit more of a spotlight. Other thing I added, saxophone. So you're going through the A section, then you just get hit with and that is played with Expand 2, which is fine, honestly. Expand 2 doesn't sound great, but it sounds enough. My brain can only understand this is a lot of work. It did take a bit to put together. Over the course of like a month, although honestly I only really worked on it at the beginning of the month, at the end of the month. And a good number of hours clocked in FL Studio to really bring it together. So yeah, Expand 2 is okay. I tried to really make it a bit more humanized by adding this attempt at vibrato, where you, in comparison without it, you just have... I mean, there's a little bit of it built into the sample, but I wanted to add a lot more, sort of with something that grows gradually. There's a very quick and kind of narrow vibrato. So it's a bit more... It's probably closer to somewhere between vibrato and a skronk, which I believe is a technical term for the saxophone. And, I mean, I don't know if you can really hear it in the final mixdown, but I think it's a very subtle thing that I very much enjoyed having in here. I think it did add a bit of complexity to the sound. I would not have felt quite so comfortable with this saxophone being in there if I didn't have that. And another layer that I brought in on the B section of the drop is this vocal chop right here, which is actually a chop of a pre-made chop from, yep, Cymatics. Because they used to have good sample packs, and now they kind of just don't. But with this chop and then a bunch of spatial effects I have on it, where is that channel? It's somewhere. There, here we are. Yeah, there's an EQ, there's a delay, there's a reverb. Realm is a reverb that I absolutely love. I don't use it all the time. For a lot of things, I'll prefer something very basic like Fruity Reverb, but Realm just has, I mean, from the name, it has so much space to it. It makes something so huge and just monumental, colossal in its scale. And I really, really love that vibe every so often, especially when I'm trying to get something that fills a lot of that space or creates this ambiance that I'm really looking for. So I end up with this chop, getting this sort of just like up and down motion that I don't know technically what harmony that would be compared to the root of the key or whatever chord is playing in the background at the time, but I think it is good. I think this is also, yeah, that's pitched up by 7 semitones. 700 cents up. If I can just... Yeah. You shut up. You stop that. Yeah, originally it was something a lot more just like... And you kind of tell where I ended up getting these. Oh. Oops. I didn't mean to do that. Go back to channel 15, please. Alright, and there's also the filter that I have to bring it in later, or early in the track. And take it out later over here. Miss Twitch emotes, but you made... Hello, Orion. Welcome to Music Nerd Time. It's perfect for us. Yeah. Again, things that make me lean towards moving to Twitch. Fucking emotes. Just... I mean, you gotta be, like, affiliated, stroke, monetized either way, but it's significantly easier on Twitch. Which isn't even something I care about necessarily, because the hell kind of money am I going to make off this? And I am also full-time employed anyway. But, MS Twitch, yeah, Twitch emotes good. But, digression, anyway. What's the emotes of the thing? Yeah. Yeah. 100%. It's not the being able to make money. It's just the extra shit you get that just makes like streaming and interacting like really fun, honestly. It's that sort of stuff. And then also I've talked about Twitch integrating with OBS fucking so much better. Like, ridiculously better. I'm upset every day I have to go stream, and I have to tell my chat the new URL for the pop-out chat window for my stream every single time. That's the fucking worst. Anyway. So, that's that part of the B section, that vocal loop, or vocal chop loop, I guess, would be a better thing to call it. And I think last thing I want to get into before going into, like, I think first, knuckle cracked. I'm gonna go into first a little Easter egg in this drum loop that I have, and then into probably the vocals next, and then something that or just like how I sort of build space in track, because I feel like that is something that when I'm putting something together for the first time, I sort of struggle with, is having everything feel like it has its place and that there's no emptiness that is specifically calling out to be filled. Because, I mean, some things are just like, they just ask to be sort of empty and vacant just to give it space. Other things don't, and I don't like to have those. So just a very brief thing that I put in this loop here, that I wonder how many people noticed. I liked putting it in, but you've got, I think this is when it really, this is the length of the actual drum loop here, or more like this. You've got, like, you know, it's a pretty basic, like, jungle drum loop. You've got your drum break that you start with. It adds most of the, like, non-kick and snare action is in the break. That's like all the cymbals and all the hi-hats are up here. And then just a fairly basic kick layer. It's very low in the mix, and also, if I could control my goddamn scroll bar, it's quite low in the mix. You can see the rather small size of the waveform, and it also fades out pretty quickly. And then there's the extra layer I put in the snare, which is this sound. It's the fucking Internet Explorer click sound. Yeah, I love that I managed to fit that in. It's like how once I also sampled Diablo 2 for a snare. Good old IE. Actually, let me see if I can just very briefly pull out the... Oh god, oh Jesus. Pull out the Diablo 2 snare that I've used in a handful of tracks before, and I probably will use again because I think it's A, really good, and B, really funny. Let me see, it is... Where to go? Skull snare. Yep, it's the sound of placing a skull in your inventory or dropping it on the ground in Diablo 2. It's a surprisingly good snare. So outside of that little Easter egg, next up that I probably should talk about is the vocals. I'm gonna feel real weird talking about this and showing it off. But firstly, originally, this was going to be a Vocaloid track. And one of these layers actually is...
What are you doing?
Oh, not that one. It is... Oh god, which one is it? This one. No, this one. It's fucking Len. One of the vocal layers is Len. And that managed to stay in to the end. And so, one of the things I should probably talk about is the lyrics themselves. And I wrote this. Thankfully, I can say that this was not from any personal experience and not 100% based on anyone I know. But it is very much a song about finding yourself in just a very troubling situation and like basically inches away from being dead on the ground and just hopeless, desperately wanting some kind of help and some kind of comfort, and someone comes into your life to supposedly bring you up out of that. You rush in to just latching onto them, growing close to them, starting like a relationship together, and then all they want to do is have you as a display piece. They just want you to act how they want at all times, whether that's consistent or not, and you just become this puppet for them. And that's the place that these lyrics come from. If I can pull them up and I'll just read them straight, if I can find wherever I saved them, because my organization is not the best. In fact, I think this is literally called liquid drum and bass lyrics.txt. It's not even named after the song. But like, if you weren't like there for the lyric video, the lyrics there, I was lost and you were there to find me. Now I live with regret of that serendipity. I'm bleeding out without a tongue to lick my wounds. I'm just hope I'm dying here, but I can't speak for myself. I hate myself because all of me is you. And then I wrote the bridge as like an exchange, a back and forth, showcasing some double talk from one participant and like the voiced woes of the subject of, so it's put it on, take it off, just speak up, shut your mouth, open your eyes, don't look now. Why can't you just be normal, like what I want? Chew me up, spit me out, push and pull, what's it about? What goes around comes around, don't you love me? Then obviously the chorus of what are you doing to me? Just leave me be. What are you doing to me? I'm begging you, please let me be me. And like, I've had some people say like this hits too close to home, so I guess I did a great job of that. Again, I'm happy to say that this is not based on my own experiences and not directly based on anyone I know, although I do know some people who've been in some truly troubling situations and relationships, and that's definitely where these lyrics come from, is just like calling out to that, like, I see you and I can barely even imagine what it's been like for you. Not to get like too dark, but it's not a happy track, so that's where the lyrics come from. And I hope that wasn't too much for anybody, because that's like the last thing that I want. Obviously, art is art, and I have things to express, but like I also don't want to make anyone like too uncomfortable here. This is supposed to be a nice place to be. Anyway, the first recordings that hit the playlist here is the chorus. That was probably the best place I could have started. So we have the through line for all of them, the through line through all the lines in the chorus is just like this doubled line So there's one recording in the left ear, one recording in the right ear to give it a lot of width. And I tried very hard to mix and process them to sound equal in like volume and dynamics and such. I don't know if I did a great job of that, but something I really tried for. And it gives you like this effect of like kind of being, I hate my voice, kind of being like it's more surrounding you than coming from in front of you, which is definitely like having something be that wide definitely adds to this like oppressing, like you can't escape this sort of feel. And then 4 parts where there's no instrumentation, so like here where everything drops out except for the vocals, and here as well. I brought back Len, and I added this, I mean all of it is pitch corrected, but this extremely pitch corrected one that's like down the octave and gives like this "What are you doing to me?" very low, almost growly effect. And all of these have like a bunch of like compression and such as well. Do I have a voice that's great? Thank you very much. I don't know how to take compliments. Thank you. I will say that this is many passes with Newtone, and essentially Melodyne and Autotune is what Newtone is like. So altogether, this hit at the start is just this like very like broaden the frequency spectrum. Again, sort of like a wall and a wash of sound. And that is done. That's basically pretty much copy pasted for both occurrences of the chorus. There's one here where it's basically the entire A section of this first drop, but without any of the drums. So it goes from like, you know, this very what I would probably call like this like anguished cry, especially with that foghorn that I added, this anguished cry for help. And without the drums, it becomes more of like a just this sinking feeling of like, please, I am actively begging. I just need this. Like, I can't feel strong emotions anymore. I'm broken. Just let me have this for the love of God. That sort of vibe. In the second part, without the drums. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same. It is all the same vocal processing. The same hits of the lower layers and of our boy Len. And then the second part that I wrote and the second part I recorded was the bridge. Part of the vocal processing for it is the first part from the perspective of, I guess, the antagonist of the track. I brought up an octave and raised the pitch of the formants of my voice to push it into a different register, sort of give the impression of a different person. So you get sort of, I'll play the second half first, so you can like get how my voice sounds in this sort of post-processing normally, and then I'll bring in the first half where there's the change of register, where it starts as sort of like that sort of range. And then the first half is a lot higher. It's much more like, I feel like I did a pretty good job of like differentiating those as different characters. I do wonder how well it comes across to other people. I feel like it is also helped by the change of second versus first person pronouns. I think that's how I wrote it. I wrote it and I don't even remember. But I feel like the change of perspective is clear both from how the lyrics are written and from the effects applied to the voice. And then the last part that was recorded and written, and I think was kind of unfinished. This might even be like one of the last parts of the song that I did is finish writing and recording the verse, which only appears once. Does that make it a verse? I feel like this is more like, is A, B, C, B, C verse chorus structure? I don't know, but I'm gonna go with it. And I think that this post-processing on the verse is a lot more bare bones. There's a lot less OTT compression. There's a lot less EQing. It's still pretty strongly processed and very strongly pitch and time corrected, because I fucking cannot actually sing. By God. I feel like I can, and then I'll record myself and I'll go into new tone. It's like, oh, actually, no. But they didn't stop me this time. It'll stop me later. But I feel like I put these vocals to a lot less filtering and a lot less processing. That's a lot truer to what I would sound like if I did have good pitch control and good timing. So it's more of a like a
was lost, and you were there to find me. Now I live with regrets of that serendipity. I'm bleeding out without a tongue to lick my wounds. I hate myself because all of me is you.
And for all these, I just like drenched them in reverb and delay to just, again, build this space and this atmosphere. Like this all-encompassing, truly huge, I guess, like mental space that the subject and the listener are just trapped in. It is not necessarily claustrophobic, but oh boy, are you trapped. That is true. I do need to start somewhere, and this is not my first time doing vocals in general. So there's a reason that I managed to process these all the way that I did, and I knew what I was doing in that front, because I process vocals a lot, and I've recorded them a handful of times, and I know what to do to make my vocals sound the way that I want them to, and the way that I wish that I sounded. Oh, and I completely forgot that in the second occurrence of the bridge, I added a harmony layer as well. That is it's not a re-recording of the harmony layer, which is specifically what I wanted. I wanted it to sound sort of artificial, and it's literally just copies of the vocals with different pitches to create this harmony that hits on. So I believe the main line focuses on the 1 of the scale, and this harmony layer hits the 5 in the octave below the first half of the bridge, and the 5 in the same octave as the second half of the bridge. So it's, I think, actually the same octave for the entirety of the harmony layer, but because it's pitched from different starting points, the timbre and formants are quite different. So like you have sort of this effect of like, so you get this like, on the one hand, this very like low Tom Waits sort of voice, and then the second half is a lot more like helium chipmunky, nightcore if you would. And the very last thing I did with the vocals is in the final drop on the back half of it, I added this layer of just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until the song hits its end. Keep grinding, your voice is fine. Oh, thank you very much. You have a good time wherever you're going. Good luck with whatever you're doing. So that's sort of the vocals here in this track, and my thoughts and process behind them. And then I want to talk about filling space. I find that it's very easy for me to put a track together and then you just end up with like something that feels kind of soulless and empty. Like all of the components are there compositionally, but there's nothing that carries the listener from one section to the other. And that's why I just fucking jam-pack my songs full of risers and impacts and downlifters. As you can see in all of this. And also technically all this, because this is also my layer of crash, of different kinds of crashes, crash symbols and such. So I feel like it's quite important, at least in my style of music, to guide the listener in the direction that the track's energy is going. So like when a section just sort of goes to another one, it can kind of feel flat. Like it's like, oh, we're here now. I didn't expect it, and now I don't know how to feel. But if you just sort of push them along with something like a noise riser, it's very basic, just like, nope, not that one. Well, there were some cymbals playing at the same time, that's why. Nope, just give me this one. No, I only want this one. Just like a... Just guide their ear. Give them a little bit of a crescendo, a little bit of a decrescendo here and there. And I also like to very much layer these together. So you'll see that there's this section that has one impact, or two impacts and a crash. There's this section that only has a crash. And this section has a crash and and one of the two impacts. And there's this that just has two impacts. So I mentioned in my overlay designing stream just a brief mention of like working smarter and not harder. I take just a handful of these impact and crash sounds and I mix and match them to create different like tiers of strength for these impacts. Like all these together is like this really big and wide and washy hit, and then you just have that which is more like a more of just finding the one, finding where you're supposed to sort of, I don't know how I'm supposed to describe this. My head isn't working too well in this very particular sense, but more just like marking, like this is the start or something, or the restart or something, because this would be at a looping point in this particular sense, or this particular case rather. Like we've come back home and we're starting this journey again. And then here where there's a crash and one of the impacts, it's not quite as long and washy, and I feel like that gives it a completely different feel. That it's sort of like a conceptualize this we're still in the same section, but something has changed and you should conceptualize it slightly differently. And then there's this white noise crescendo into an entirely new section with the combination of crashes and impacts that started off the last one. And that's sort of my logic here, is to take these wider sections, and depending on the energy that I want to convey in that section, put a different combination of these impacts and these crashes and these downlifters in them that conveys something about the section. Like for the breakdown where it's just piano and the sub bass, it's just these two impacts that are, they don't have much of like a big hit. There's nothing that like the cymbal provides. There's nothing like, there's not that like huge transient to it that the cymbal gives. There's a little bit in this top one, because it used to have like a bunch of sub bass to it as well. It was like kind of this kick with a bit of a whoosh and a bunch of reverb. But this other layer doesn't really have anything. It just sort of washes in, and the transient on this top impact is sort of lost in the kick that's also on top of it. But basically all focusing on that really long and washy impact there gives this section the more like, I should also have this for the right frequency response to the piano. It gives it that like very pulled back and reserved feel, I feel like, where it's kind of just like hearing the wind somewhere around you. So I will like lead in a section with a selection of these impacts that describe something about the section and tries to match the energy. And then I will also, to keep the listener's interest, I will subdivide those sections with further impacts and further crashes. So instead of just like, here's fucking like 16 bars of just whatever, here's 16 bars of one loop, have fun, you get these bits of ear candy that's like, oh, things are moving along, things are changing, you have somewhere you're going. I feel like that's very important in my style of music and a lot of music that I listen to just let the listener know kind of what's coming up in a sense. In other styles, it is more important to keep the listener guessing instead. But in the sort of vibes that I want to hit, I want to help them along. I'm not against whoever's listening to my song. I want them to be with me. I want them to follow along in like the story I'm trying to tell them. Honestly, sometimes the story is literally just, hey, look at this cool shit. Doesn't this sound great? Isn't this... Aren't you tired of being nice? Don't you want to go ape shit? But other times it is something more like this, where there's, like, something I want to say, either with words and vocals, or just, like, some manner of concept I want to get across. And I don't want to sort of lose someone along the way in that process. Quite mathematical. It is quite... Thank you very much. It's probably... The explanation probably makes it seem a lot more thought out than it actually is. It's one of those things where I kind of you just intuit it, but then when you find the words for what you're doing, it ends up sounding a lot more complicated. It's like anything with music theory. Music theory is not like rules, it's just ways that we describe what we already intuit with music. But then when you put all of those intuitions to words, it sounds complicated, and it sounds prescriptive, and it sounds like you should do this thing because of this reason, and not, oh, you've done this, here might be why, you know? So it's very much like a... When I'm actually putting something together, instead of trying to explain what I've done, it's a lot more like, oh, this feels a bit empty. I'll put this crash here. And then it doesn't. And then that's how you end up with something that looks like this. Just, Yeah, and this is also just kind of how I organize my projects of, like, drums. And then all of my crashes and effects, and then everything else. Okay, so there's that taken care of. I believe I have now talked about just about everything here on just the compositional level. I could dive a bit into some of my, like, patches that I've made for this. Well, I've only made 4 that are probably any amount of interesting. Arguably, I've made 3 that are any amount of interesting, because one of them is just like a square wave. I'm pretty sure that's what it was anyway. Go to... Yeah, Yep, it is just a pulse wave with a little bit of a filter. That's it. Again, work smart, not hard. Also, like, using presets, totally fine. Fucking do it. I think it's fun. I think that it's like a game to see if you can recognize presets and samples that other people have used. I think there's no shame at all in using tools that have been given to you. Like, it's not like these are, like, banned techniques. You can buy them. They're allowed. But I think probably you need to struggle for no reason. Honestly, something that I would do when I was, like, very early learning sound design, and I will still do if I'm trying to learn a specific new sound, is I'll find someone's preset, like, I'll find the preset tutorial, and instead of going down in the description and downloading the preset, I'll just follow along as they make it. And at first, that was just a blind process, where I was just like, I'll turn this knob this much because they told me to. But as I did it more and more, I started to understand what these parameters I was changing did. and then I could start making things with intentionality. A lot of people just want to start producing music and then mess around with samples, phrases like, yeah, exactly. And something that I learned, it is some advice given by a producer who goes by the alias of Dougal, who has been making happy hardcore since the 90s and still going. And when he took a young 15-year-old producer known as Gammer under his wing, who, if you either you know Gammer for being one of, like, probably the most, I think he was actually, like, objectively speaking, the most popular hardcore DJ at the time. You either know him for that, or he also released The Drop on Monster Cat, which has, like, millions of plays. But when Dougal started working first with a young 15-year-old Gammer, he said to Matt, which is, I think, Gammer's real name, he said, like, a drummer doesn't change out his drum set every single show. So why do you have to use different drum samples in every song? And then I immediately stopped feeling bad about using the same samples over and over. Like, instantly, I stopped feeling, like, awkward about that. This one riser I have used in every fucking track I've made for years. No one has noticed. Or if they have, no one has said anything. It's not like samples make the musician anyway. Exactly. They're just a sound that you can use however you want. And then, on top of all that already, presets are a great jumping off point to just make something new with them as well. Unless you make one sample that's basically unique to you. Yeah, that is true. If you make something and use it all the time, that is, like, obviously, you can take something and use it all the time, and you can make something and use it all the time, and it's pretty much just equally valid. But if you make something and use it all the time, that is now your signature sound, and that is suddenly praiseworthy. You see? Yeah. I think before that I was going to transition into some of the patches that I've done. So I think I should probably maybe try to break down this foghorn I did, partially because I did that thing I mentioned earlier with this one where I found someone else making a foghorn in Vital and press the wrong button. I found someone else making a foghorn in Vital, and then I followed along to try and understand what they were doing. And so if I take out, let's see here, no filter, no reverb, no realm reverb, no distortion, no filter, no compressor, no chorus. This sound on its own is... It's that. I mean, that's also an octave above what I was actually playing the track, but it's like... It's a sound. It is a valid series of audio samples. But I believe I have mentioned... Particularly, I think I was talking with Orion when I said that 90% of sound design happens in post-processing, not in your synthesizer. And if we go to the effects rack in Vital, we can add... I'll have this pattern play, so it'll just have this hit down here. We add the chorus. That sort of it's a chorus effect. It widens things out, it gives it a couple more layers. We add this compressor. This is a multi-band compressor, so it takes a different frequency it takes a frequency spectrum, splits it into three bands, and applies compression, upward and downward compression, to each of those bands individually. So it gives a much different character than just a straight compressor. And it gives it, you know, just kind of just beefs it up a little bit. Too big brain, just use preset on ozone. Yeah. I don't really play too much around with ozone either. I keep it very minimal. I just want it to crush my true peaks, and that's it, really. And make my bass mono, because that's also a thing. So you compress it, and it's just a bit fatter and a bit more even across the spectrum. And then, was it EQ? No, it was, nope. I don't remember where I put this. It must be delay, because there's that right there, which is automation. I said delay, I think I'm a filter. Whatever, anyway. But then you get this like a sort of, you know, a filter with pretty moderate resonance. I almost said high, but it's not that high, all things considered. Pretty moderate resonance opening up, just whack, you know. And it all comes together when you just annihilate it with maximum hard clip distortion, and you get that sound. Alright, you also have a good day or a night, Sausage Dragon, wherever time zone you happen to be. I don't actually know. But distortion is what really brings out a foghorn. You just set up all these oscillators just to give you the harmonics that you need to just bring the fuck out with massive amounts of distortion. I don't even know either. Who knows what time it is anymore? So, lesson. All this is just to give you the basis where you can take these and really shape what you want your sound to be. Obviously, it helps to have a very solid starting point on this end of things, so you don't have to work as hard here to bring out what you want. If you really wanted to, you could just play white noise and EQ out what you want. That's subtractive synthesis to an extent. But also that sucks, and it's a very hard process. Additionally, additive synthesis, you could just play fucking 100 sine waves to get all the harmonics you want. But, like, that's hard. I have not learned how to use Harmor, which is what that is. Just Harmor being FL Studio's like flagship additive synth. And I think that was the one that they took away, which really fucking sucks. So that's sort of what's going on with that patch. I think that's probably the most interesting patch that I have here, just to get this like huge atmospheric hit that happens a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 times in the song. All that for 6 notes. I think that this is probably also an interesting one that I did, because I took advantage of using the velocity, if I can open the piano roll. So like of this note compared to these notes way down here, I'm gonna use that. What did I map that to? Something. Let's check the matrix. Velocity to this cutoff, looks like. Yep. So when I play a note with low velocity, if I was playing this on a MIDI controller, or a piano keyboard, if I played it softly, then the note would be very closed off, very just focusing only on the low end of the frequencies. And when I play it hard, then it really opens up and takes really all like the actual proper meat of the sound and lets it come through. I wanted to just have it be like there's a thing that worked out, but it didn't end up quite working out because some of Vital's controls are a little bit limited slightly. I wanted to be more like just this big wide hit is that, and then just have it more work out, just be more automated of this much lower, bassier, closed off tone with these notes, where there's like not really any of that opening like wow sound, but this is kind of the only way I saw to get that get those dynamics out. There's probably other ways that people smarter than me could have done, but I'm not smarter than me, so that's how I did it. And I also, I took this upper band of the multi-band compressor and just killed it. There's pretty much nothing there until I think I actually stupidly, did I perhaps bring it back in EQ later? I definitely took out a low end on this set of OTT. How about, well, I brought it into this channel where I did bring that all back. So maybe I didn't have to do that. Oh well. This is another thing of going back through these with like a fine-tooth comb trying to explain what I did, and I realized, oh, I could have done that way fucking differently too. But this is pretty much all frequency modulation, which is really complicated. Well, for the most part, it can get very complicated if you are not aware of frequency modulation and what exactly that means. It is, so this sine wave is getting frequency modulation from this sine wave, meaning that the pitch of this first wave is going up and down with the amplitude of this wave at the frequency of this wave. So if this was only playing at 1 hertz, then this first oscillator would only pitch up and down 1 cycle per second. But this oscillator is not going at 1 hertz. It's playing 2 octaves below B3, so it's playing a B1, which is significantly faster than 1 hertz. That's several hundred hertz. So that creates a very different kind of sound when the pitch is changing so quickly that it is no longer perceptible as rhythm. It is now itself a pitch. Because pitch and rhythm are the same thing. And then this is also getting frequency modulation from the same sine wave, which is also audible, so that's an entirely other kettle of fish. But it ends up, and I think both of these have, both these are coming from LFO1, which has this curve to it. So it's controlling the amplitude of that frequency shift. Going from, and they also have, you can kind of see on the screen the little green like line around the wheel, around the knob, where that is the maximum amount of change via this low frequency oscillator. There's also not even topping out. So it's hard to perfectly translate that to how much is how much that effect is being applied. But different amounts for each of them to create these different timbres. And then they're being low pass filtered as well. And then through all this mess too. Sound design gets complicated very quickly, especially when you're working with frequency modulation. And that can be a bit of a pet peeve of mine, because often when I was learning, I would ask like, how was this sound done? And people would just say, that sounds like FM. That sounds like frequency modulation. And then not explain what that fucking meant or how to do it. And I get it. It's hard. It's a complicated concept. But I don't need to know how it works. Just tell me what knob to turn. Tell me what effects to apply. That's all I want. But it's like, let's just use FM. Like it's just a switch you flick. Grievances aside, I do wish people would have been a lot more open to explaining things when I was asking for them to be explained. So those are definitely the most interesting patches in this track. I think I've now pretty much explained the entirety of it. From start to finish. Every part that I believe is interesting. If there's any further questions, I suppose, then I would be truly happy to talk more about my hyperfixation. But otherwise, I believe that this whole adventure is all done and dusted. The track has been fully explored to my satisfaction. And any requests after the fact I'll gladly go into. Whether that's after the fact as in now, or after the fact as in 3 weeks from now, someone's like, hey, I watched your thing. What the fuck? Or, hey, I didn't watch your thing. Explain this to me. Or more likely, no one's going to ask. They're just going to listen to it and go, oh, that's cool. Which I'm fine with. I do that for basically all the music I listen to. And I do this in my free time. And then I was like, that's a song with a super saw. Haha, nice. And then about my day. So I think that this calls for wrapping things up then. Thank you very much to everyone who listened to the song on its premiere and or came by for this breakdown, even for just a small amount of time. I deeply appreciate all of this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Orion, for being here. I know I asked you and you're like, yeah, I'll probably wake up around then. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Thanks. I appreciate all of you. And so that's it out of me. We will return to stream, yet to go full track. Just woke up so late. I don't blame you at all, honestly. And take your time. There's no longer a time limitation. It's just there whenever. That's the beauty of non-linear media. Good. Excellent. So I'll close it off here. I'll be back tomorrow evening. We'll be continuing East 8 and making it somewhat further. I've worked out all the problems I was having before with it. I think. Technically, I haven't tested them yet, but I read about it enough, and I changed my Steam input settings, so it should just work. And if not, fuck. So, enough rambling out of me. I will be back tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody. Mwah, 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 mwah.